Welcome to episode 28.5 of the How'd It Happen podcast, hosted by Mike Malatesta. As you've been listening along, you've noticed the .5 helps you know this is something different that we squeezed in between our usual podcast guests on the show. In fact, this is part 3 of our 3-video podcast series where Aleta Norris, the leadership expert and co-founder of Living as a Leader, has been chatting with Mike about some blogs he's written, asking him some thought-provoking questions to ultimately bring out good life lessons for entrepreneurs. I'm Joe DiNucci, Mike's podcast producer and blog collaborator. In this episode, Mike shares 2 blogs, one titled, I Want This Deal Too Badly, where Mike ignores the obvious signs that he should not be buying a couple of different companies, but they have similar situations. And the second blog, titled My S Man Blindside, about an employee he calls S Man, who was acting as a spy in his organization and ultimately betrays Mike after developing a great friendship with him and growing business together. If you missed part 1 and part 2 of this video podcast series, check out episode 25.5 and episode 27.5. You can watch the video on MikeMalatesta.com or listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. Let's catch up with Mike on I Want This Deal Too Badly.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. I'm going to read the post to give you some context for the interview, which you can listen to or watch, and I hope you enjoy. There have been times when I've wanted something so badly that it makes me stupid or cocky, probably both, which wouldn't be so bad and perhaps might even be excusable if I learned from the experience and never did it again. But I haven't, and still don't. At least not always. Maybe you can relate. The same kind of thing has happened to me too many times when I'm driving. I know that turning left here is not the right way because I've done it before and it was wrong. So what do? I turn left. Same action expecting a different result. I feel like Einstein had a definition for that. Occasionally, these wants were acquisitions. Opportunities to grow quickly and easily, because what's easier than an acquisition after all? 2 of my quote-unquote want something so badly times were similar, in fact. Too similar, proving that just because history may repeat itself, it doesn't mean that I will recognize that the repeat is about to happen. I'm good at being blind when being so suits my aspirations. Both happened in Northwest Indiana, about 8 years from one another. Close enough to remember the lessons from the first, but far enough apart to take the same left turn I already knew was the wrong way. It might be fair to chalk the first one up to inexperience, but there's no way to get around the fact that the second was result of full-blown hubris, blended with a little we're the smartest guys in the room stupidity. I'm with Larry, my partner in crime, so to speak, as we roll into Michigan City, Indiana, a cousin to Gary, on the south shores of Lake Michigan. We'd been interested in expanding our fledgling waste empire in the Hoosier state, and were hunting an acquisition that could establish us there. And here it was, a double-wide office trailer and a small pole building. Or was it a Quonset hut? We looked at each other like Jeff Spicoli looked at Jefferson's brother after crashing Jefferson's Z28 Camaro in the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I hope that's a reference that you get. With a wink of confidence and without words, Larry and I brain traded Spicoli's seemingly confident but totally BS line, "We can fix this." Our knock on the trailer door was answered by the anger of 2 barking dogs. Should have been strike 1, because this was before take a dog to work, or everywhere, fascination had taken over. "Hope you like dogs," the owner of the establishment asked as he opened the double-wide. "And if we didn't?" I digress. "Of course," we said. After all, this was our first date. Have to be on our best behavior. Can't call the baby ugly or the dogs intimidating, if you know what I mean. Turns out they were friendly in a jump up on you with dirty paws kind of way. We pushed on, persevering through the tour of the yard and the processing plant, the former of which was littered with trucks and trailers in various stages of decay, and the latter full of barrels of waste stacked floor to ceiling. The quote-unquote processing relied upon a mini cement-type mixer, about which the owner and his son, who operated said processing equipment, were quite proud, despite the evidence that its production capacity was clearly inadequate for the demand, at least according to the inventory. "We can fix this," we said to each other, this time in words, as we drove back to the tollway oasis where we'd met earlier. We can fix anything. Fast forward a few months, we bought the business, and you're not going to believe this, as it turns out, we couldn't fix it, even though we got it for a song. I still remember telling the bank that even if this business is a total loser, we're paying so little that we'd still come out ahead. Foreshadowing, probably. Wishful thinking, maybe. Stupidity, clearly. We should have listened to Karen, our CFO, who, after a day of due diligence in the double wide with the dogs, asked me, with some concern in her voice, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "We can fix this, Karen," I assured her. The truth is that we got the place cleaned up and the excess inventory gone. Their super machine was not much help, so we had to truck all the barrels to our plant in Milwaukee. Mission accomplished, but then what? Oh, did I mention that nearly everyone at the company had some family relation to the owner? No problem. We can fix that, after all. We realized in the first week that we'd made a big mistake. Not lethal, but big. We didn't talk about it because there was nothing really to say. Within 6 months, maybe it was a year, we had closed the location. We kept the trucks and a couple of drivers who could pass the drug test and show up, at least mostly. Although we struggled daily with Michigan City being in the Eastern time zone and the rest of our organization in the Central time zone, which confused our dispatch considerably and caused us a lot of latenesses. Another recipe for disaster was that we'd missed in our extensive due diligence. Larry and I weren't done yet, though. Northwest Indiana was important to us, after all. We had to find a solution that worked. The next opportunity came to us, and this time it was in the city of Gary, which was not necessarily an asset. Fortunately, we'd recently started an operation nearby, so this Gary operation was easily movable into that location in Portage. A perfect tuck-in, we thought. Instant scalability. No problem. We can fix this. The Gary company was what the automotive industry might call a clean one owner compared to the Michigan City model we'd already bought. Of course, everything is relative. Gary turned out to be a smoking in the office and staff of spouses, sons, cousins, aunts, and uncles kind of place. No dog, but there was a family of barn cats living in the shop. Oh, and one other thing. They had an owner, that is 100% owner, and another owner, who in reality actually thought I was an owner, which is another thing we hadn't dealt with before, who really owned nothing. A different kind of challenge. No problem. We can fix this. Michael told us that he's an owner, we asked the owner. He's not an owner, the owner responded. Well, we need him because he runs the whole operation and he thinks he's owed a portion of the sale price. How do you intend to make that right? We continued. I'll make it right by Michael, the owner promised, and we trusted that he would. He didn't, at least not to Michael's satisfaction. It took maybe 2 weeks before Michael joined another company and took most of the employees and customers with him. He left us the undocumented workers who had fake Social Security cards we relied upon for their I-9, and the ones who found him creepy. Very clever. We pondered, attempting to deal with the fact that we'd been outsmarted by a guy we thought we were smarter than. What exactly just happened? It was another one of our many, at least in retrospect it seems like many, WTF moments. How the hell could we be so dumb? It stung. more so because it was completely self-afflicted. We were caught in a want that was stronger than our will. It was another "we can fix this" fable we read to ourselves and believed. I'd like to tell you that Larry and I learned our lesson, finally, from this Gary experience. So I will. Actually, I think we did. It led us to developing a more intelligent acquisition decision-making process, one filled with questions that had to be answered and boxes that had to be checked. No-goes were more clearly defined. We ditched our Spicoli, "we can fix this" self-delusion. If the Matrix said it's a yes, we went ahead. If it said it was a no, we stopped. Mostly. After all, stupid is no way to go through life. Dean Wormer words of wisdom to which we should have afforded more attention.
You wrote a blog called "I Ignored the Signs," and I just shared with you a few moments ago that it almost is funny reading about it, and I'm sure none of this was funny at the time. You wrote about a couple of acquisitions, neither of which went very well for you.
Right.
But you had kind of a we can figure it out approach. So tell us about the dog and the first one and the signs that you missed.
Yeah. Well, so my partner Larry and I found out about this. I can't remember how we found out about this company that was for sale, potentially for sale. So we went to visit, and we drove up, and you can kind of get a sense of whether a company is well managed by what it looks like when you roll up, and this one didn't give you that sense, but there were a lot of things. There were debris all over the place, stuff like that, and then there was this office trailer sort of tied down in the front of the shop building. And when we knocked on the door, all you heard was these two dogs, just ripping mad sounding dogs. And I thought, it's not exactly the welcome that I would want, to be giving to two potential acquirers. But anyway, I hadn't experienced that before. This was way before the bring a dog to work thing was something that everybody was happy about or into. Mm-hmm.
So you ended up, evidently you ignored the signs, you bought the company, you cleaned up the yard, and how long did this acquisition last for you?
Well, we kept some of the equipment for a long time, but on the people front, I think everyone was gone in 2 years. And probably half were gone in less than a year because they just weren't a fit. It wasn't like they left because they found something better. It's just they weren't a fit, and we completely missed that because we just felt like we can make anybody a fit.
So your final comment in your blog is, stupid is no way to go through life. So what was this Spicoli, "we can fix this" delusion that you and Larry had?
Yeah, well, we really wanted to be in Northwest Indiana, Aleta, and ultimately our desire to be there got in the way of our thinking about how we should get there. So in an earlier interview, we talked about a mistake we made the first time in Indiana, and then this would be the second time. And there's a lot of parallels, but they were all sort of driven by we have to be here. Like we just were convinced that we had to be in that area.
Mm-hmm. There seems in both cases to have been a cultural misfit because it must be in Gary, Indiana. It's family. It's husbands and wives and sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts. And is that what you were missing?
Well, yes, although I don't think that's unique to Gary. We've missed that a few other times that aren't included in this blog. But in this particular case, we completely underestimated the family dynamic, particularly with the partner who wasn't actually a partner but thought he was a partner. And when those two guys went to make the split of the proceeds, the partner who was not a partner didn't like the split, and he happened to be connected to a lot more family than the other guy. And so it wasn't long, and I'm talking like 2 weeks, before he was gone with all of his relatives to another competitor. And yeah, that was that. So I was left with the other side of the family.
Okay. So so not very fun situations for you. What's the end of the story for you, and what happened in your acquisitions following these couple of not so great experiences?
Yeah. Well, we had some wins. The ones where we won were, I would say, we were lucky. Okay, so maybe they weren't in a different geography; they were somewhere close, and so we could more easily integrate them or run them. We didn't have to rely on the people, especially family members, to run it. And I love family businesses; are great. I think they're fantastic. But buying a family business has not worked out for us, so I'm not going to do it anymore. If it's one thing to have a son or a daughter who works during the summer, but if 5 of the top 10 people there are related, I just can't do it.
Well, what I certainly would imagine in closing is that because of your experiences and your insights, you will likely be a very good coach for others trying to do the same thing.
Well, I'm definitely willing to help. If someone thinks I can coach, I would definitely help them.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing the story. Your humility and transparency is really refreshing.
Well, thanks for having me.
You bet.
My S Man Blindside. In a previous blog post titled "I Thought I Hired a King," I described writing a letter to myself about what I needed to do about a person I'd hired, who I thought would be our sales team leadership savior, but wasn't. About what I needed to do because he wasn't. There was no blindside story there, just facts assembled over time that led to a decision to move on. Unfortunate, maybe, but natural, even innocent, at least as these things go. This story is as, or more, unfortunate. It's just not as natural or innocent, and it wasn't on my terms, which of course makes it worse, at least for me. It was my S Man Blindside. I should have seen it coming. I knew I hadn't hired a king with this one. I thought he was a pawn with possibilities. Unproven, low on stature, a little rough around the edges, clay to mold. He came to me near the beginning, when my company was just getting off the ground. We'd worked together earlier at another company, and had both been fired from that company. We had that in common. I was in the final planning stages for starting a company, which felt like a job, but the reality was we were still both out of work. We played tennis together one day, and I don't think I've played tennis since, and sealed the deal, so to speak. The S-Man was now on my team. In fact, besides my partner Butch, the S-Man was the only player on my team. Employee number 3. It was 1993, and S-Man was our sales team. We got along great. Together, he and I helped identify prospective clients and came up with a game plan to get their business. We had a lot of fun doing this, and over the years, our company grew and thrived. The S-Man was a big part of our success. The S-Man worked from an office he'd put together, first in his apartment and later in a house he'd bought with his commissions. We'd talk often, but had no formal sales or time accountability plan, so he was pretty much free to do what he wanted, which, by the way, was fine with me. He produced results. I was happy and proud to watch the S-Man succeed along with us, and I enjoyed his friendship as well. During our time together, the S-Man got married, moved from a small apartment to an older house with a lot of character, and generally enjoyed the luxuries that come with the six-figure income he'd earned. He and his wife were welcome party guests at our home. Our stars and our futures were aligned. All was good with the universe. Until it wasn't. On a chilly morning in April 1999, I called the S Man because I needed him to take care of something for me. He told me he was leaving the company. Come again? I was surprised. Shocked. What the F? I was also stupid. I tried to change the S Man's mind. To keep him. Pretend like nothing happened. I was desperate. Throw some more money at him. Offer him equity. Keep him on board. What will it take? I'm barfing a bit as I write this. But the truth is that I was lucky that the S-Man had his mind made up and wasn't interested in entertaining my moment of weakness offers. My desperation ran straight into his confidence, and luckily, he wasn't budging. Turns out that the S-Man had long ago decided not just to leave, but to team up with another company to scheme, conspire, and compete against us. He'd hit it well. I never saw it coming. It's not that there weren't plenty of signs. Less frequent conversations, less eye contact when we were together. A chumminess with a subcontractor that was more than what was warranted. I just wasn't looking, because looking would make it real. The S-Man made a feeble attempt to justify his decision. He wanted a head start on his future. He was afraid he was making so much money that we would fire him, that we'd replace him with a different pawn or two. He thought I'd sell the company and he'd be out on his ass. All BS. Turns out that while he was setting up his new business arrangement, he was stealing from us. Records, contacts, client information. He even stole his non-compete agreement by conspiring with an acquaintance who had access to our records as a result of the discovery process related to a separate lawsuit. The S-Man left no stone unturned. Because I tended to hold grudges in those days, the S-Man and his co-conspirator and I fought about this for several years. We sued each other and went out of our way to make each other's lives miserable. On balance, the S-Man got the short end of the stick, the details of which are another story. It's a karma kind of thing. But I paid a price as well. I lost a friend, I lost some money and clients, but most of all, I lost faith and trust. And that's been the toughest one to replace. When I tell the S-Man story to others, they offer empathy and disdain at what a weasel he was. I'll admit, that feels good, but it's also BS. Remember, I knew I wasn't hiring a king with the S-Man. I knew he was in it for S, that he could turn on me at any moment, that I should expect betrayal or stupidity at any moment, that I needed to keep him on a tight leash. And what I do with all that knowledge? I left him alone. I shit the bed. The S-Man was not the kind of guy I should have been blindsided by. He was just being who he is. I allowed myself to get whacked in the head because I did not act on my suspicions. Instead, I let them ride, and the S-Man, being who he is, took advantage of my inattention. Lesson learned. The relief was that he got off my good to great bus, and before Jim Collins ever wrote about it. I know that I'll have another S-Man situation in my own company, and I bet you will as well. There are so many of them out there. It's not an if, but a when. It's guaranteed. In fact, I'll probably have several, and I hope you do. Because the lessons they teach are uniquely and simultaneously ugly, yet poignant. S-Man situations give us the opportunity to really learn about who we want to be around, who you need to be around, and what you need to do to attract and retain those who's. I like to think that most people are programmed from birth to trust other people. I know I am. Our desire to trust is built into the fabric of who we are, and yes, some people will take advantage of that. It's sad, but good. We can all learn as much from the con men, the rats, and the grifters as we can from the good people. In fact, we can learn more. In my career, the worst people, my S men and women, have always provided me with the best lessons. It's not that they don't challenge and poison my fundamental belief in the human condition. They do, and that sucks. They also do something very powerful. They teach me. More than any books I've read or experts I've listened to, my own experiences with the worst people have taught me all I need to know about them. And this stings a bit, but about me as well. I feel like I've learned to deal with S folks, to accept responsibility for letting them in. I do control the door, after all, while moving on when the inevitable happens, aware that the door swings both ways. Here's my blind side, my S-Man therapy. It's the product of years of making it too hard on myself, coupled with the acknowledgement that I can only control what I control, which, as I get older, I realize is less and less. Here's the advice I give myself in practice, mostly because I'm human after all. Number 1, take an hour or so to pout about it. Be angry about it or do whatever it takes, short of bodily injury, to release the emotion you feel. It's cathartic and necessary. Number 2, do this alone, not in front of my team or my spouse. They have their own problems and probably knew this person was an S-man long before I did. Number 3, spread the message to the team that it's no big deal and that, while unfortunate, we will now turn this into an opportunity to find a better person. A yin to the S-man's yang. Number 4, grab my pen and write down all the things I could have, should have, and will do to prevent this from happening again, keeping in mind that it will still probably happen again. It's about progress, not perfection. And number 5, reaffirm my trust in people. The worst possible outcome is to give up on people because of an S-man experience. I can't allow this to happen to me, my team, or my company. I'm the only one who can prevent it, and I must. I need to make new deposits to my trust account that are larger than the withdrawal that any S-man can take. Those deposits are available from the rest of the team all around me, from my family and friends. They're widely available, and they're free.
My S-man was a spy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had a guy in your organization who was a great hire, and he turned out to be someone you've now labeled as S-man,
right,
who was not good for your organization. So tell us just a bit about that.
Yeah, it was when we were first getting started, and I had worked with this fellow before, and got along well with him, and it was interesting because when we first started, I didn't have room for him, couldn't afford to pay him, but he sort of worked out, a side sort of gig, like if stuff came in, then we would pay him, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, we'll try that, and then that converted into full-time employment. He did really well. We did well with him. I thought everything was great, and then one day I called him because I needed him to do something, and he informed me that he wasn't going to work with us anymore, effective immediately. But it turned out that it had been in the works for a long time, Aleta.
Mm-hmm. So it was a bad moment for you, and you shared in your blog that you lost a friend, you lost some money, and you lost some clients, but most of all, you lost faith and trust in people. So where are you at with that?
Ooh, it's kind of connected to the grudge thing, right? So that may very well have been my first grudge. I guess I feel like I've been super lucky on the trust thing, even though I've had some things happen, and we've talked about in other episodes pursuing grudges. I never lost faith. So if you walked into my door, even if that just happened, I would be like, I'm all in with you. Okay, because I'm going to be all in. You're going to be all in with me. I'm going to be all in with you. That's how I never lost that part, thankfully. because I've seen people who've lost that, and they are actually horrible.
Well, it really is
bad.
unfortunate. And you actually put together some advice at the end of your blog, and the last thing you said was to reaffirm your trust in people. And you were very proactive in getting a handle back on this faith and trust thing. You took control of it.
Yeah, I felt like if I were to lose that, I'm just going to descend into somewhere I don't want to be, right, and somewhere that nobody working here wants to be. So have to, we acknowledge that something bad happened. Okay. And then they never heard from me, the people in the company never heard from me what I was, the grudge I would pursue on him. We would just pass that and on to bigger and better things.
It's great. Yeah. Great story to share. It happens to lots of people. And I think one of your strongest lessons in all of this is that you can take control and make it better again.
Yeah.
So, great blog.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.